So let's give the example of using Twitter. So you can see I make a lot of typos. I have a new keyboard. I'm gonna make a lot of more typos than this. This is only beginning. So that's that. Nobody's here yet, so talking isn't of much use yet. I'll tune in all my devices. So, let's start with the necessary part. Who am I? I'm Eric. I'm not the Eric that I was expecting to hear and see today, but I'm Eric Roos. I am an accessibility lead at ING. I am an accessibility consultant, so I help companies to get their websites accessible. And every week I stream about accessibility, and that's what we're doing right now. So I hope to have some experience to share with you, and more than experience, I hope you have some questions for me. This stream has some captions. They are automated, generated captions. I hope to have manual captions someday. I'm still looking for a sponsor. If you know one or you are one, please let me know. I would very much like actual captions. And I know the people who use captions also really like manual captions much more than the automated ones. So I was planning on having Eric Bailey as my guest tonight. I think he has a lot of interesting things to say. I'll still plug his article on Smashing. I'll share it in the chat as well. Equivalent experiences, what are they? As you can see, Eric Bailey wrote it. The idea was for us to go through it tonight, to have a look at what he wrote and discuss it with him. But I'm afraid he could not join us, so it's just gonna be me about images and alt text. As I said, I have a new keyboard, so the sound you'll hear will be more like this. If you can even hear it, I hope so. That it's actually more quiet, that's the goal. It's a more quiet keyboard than I had, also much cleaner, much nicer to use. I'll have to get used to it. So I will make a lot of typos, but the goal is to have a more quiet experience. So I hope it's an improvement. Let me know. I cannot start the stream with saying this has been a very strange week. A lot of riots happening, mostly in the US, but some in the Netherlands as well. Protests. Black Lives Matters has been a huge theme this week. My Twitter stream is full with more message about it than ones that don't mention it. It's been very overwhelming. I find it very hard to say anything about it, to formulate my own thoughts about it. But we are speaking about alt text tonight, and that's because something I tweeted that's related to both. And I'll just grab it so I won't misquote myself. That's always easy. Eric. So on Twitter, I had a message go through all my messages because there are too many. Me complaining to companies and such. So what I said on Twitter and what is the starting point of what I'm going to do tonight. It's this, and it's also very strongly how I feel about Black Lives Matter of what I have seen, that it's weird seeing all these organizations share images with text about how inclusive they are, but they don't add an alternative text which excludes blind people from reading their messages. So I think accessibility and especially inclusive design, that's what we call much of the design that accessibility people do. It's really hard to see it separate from a movement like Black Lives Matters. It's about being inclusive, and it would be strange if you include people with disabilities, for example, but choose to not include black people or whatever color or ableist, whatever color they have or what abilities they have. It doesn't matter. Being inclusive is being inclusive about all people. So I've been reading a lot this week. It's been very busy, but it's also very hard to form an opinion. So I'm just going to give my angle at this, and we're going to start at Twitter. And we're going to look at alt text. So a lot of organizations, I think you've seen them as well, they all send out these messages about how they really care, about how they are inclusive, and somehow they find this message important, more important than before, finally important, I don't know. But we're seeing a lot of these messages, and what stands out is that all these messages don't have alt text. And that's really strange. Because what is alt text? Well, I'll start with stopping my music, by the way. I don't think we need that right now. I'm not even sure if you hear my music, but I hear music and it's distracting me. So I'm closing my music on a different monitor. Yeah, that's much better. So a lot of organizations have images. They talk about including people, but they don't add an alt text, which means they exclude people. Actually, they exclude people that need this alt text to understand their message. So if you simply Google Twitter alt text, it's actually the first link you see. It's purple because I opened it before. How to make images accessible for people, just people. That's a nice title. And I'm just going to read out loud what I see here. When you tweet photos using the Twitter app for iOS or Android, or on twitter.com, which is, I think, most people that don't use an alternative client, you have the option to compose a description of the image so the content is accessible to more people, including those who are blind or low vision. Yeah, it's accessible to more people. It adds an accessible name. We'll talk about that as well. And it mentions here blind or low vision, but if you have low literacy, a screen reader can also be nice. There are other pieces of technology that also make use of the image alt text, and we'll get to that later. But the main target group, a lot of people that you will improve the lives of, are the blind and the low vision, because you can imagine that if a company or an organization shares an image and the image is full of text, that text is just a bunch of pixels basically. And a screen reader, which is software that is used to read what is on screen, does not know what the content of that image is. It can only read the pixels, which has no value. It cannot read the text because there are no letters. They are not separate letters as like I see this on a website. I can select text. That doesn't work on an image. You can select the whole image or nothing, but you cannot select text like this. That's a big difference between images and sharing actual text. So Twitter says some things about it. Good image descriptions are concise and descriptive, helping people understand what's happening in an image. And here are the actual instructions for Twitter. We'll go there later. I'm just going to go through the Twitter website to give an impression of what it is. Because if you look at this website, you'll see a lot of images. A lot of them are on the left side here. So we're going to start. I'm just going to go through the website and talk about them. And we have our first people in the chat. Welcome. If you have any questions about alt text or something related to this, please let me know. I'm just going to start inspecting the website. Going to enlarge it a little bit, looking at my keyboard because it's new, so I have to look for the keys. And I'm going to do an inspect element. You can do this on pretty much any browser. And I'm going to zoom in a bit, make things bigger and smaller so everybody can see it. We don't need the CSS stuff, so I'm just going to move it to the side. And then we're going to see where the actual image is, I'm just going to dive into the code. Don't discuss it too much, but okay. So, oh, that's going to be fun. What, oh yeah, inspecting elements on Twitter. I won't say anything about the amount of diffs or the CSS classes. I promise. Really, no, I won't. There's lots to say about that, but that's a completely different topic. So what's interesting here is that they use an SVG. And I think Twitter uses those a lot. I actually wanted to pick this one. Yeah, see here also an SVG. So this means that Twitter includes an SVG file. And an SVG is technically a vector image. And a vector image means it doesn't consist of pixels, but it's more like a set of mathematical equations. You can make it as large or as small as you want. A circle isn't a set of pixels. It just says where to put the center of the circle and how how big the circle should be. This is not the usual, the way most people add their images. And I'll show you what most people do. We'll just make a code pen. This is our code playground that we can use for an example. So I make a code pen. So you have an image tag, and you set a source. So this could be any image file. Usually on the web it's JPEG. So I'm just going to say image.jpg. And I'm going to put it like this. Self-closing for legacy reasons. So this would be what you might find in a HTML tutorial. So you have a tag, and you set the source of an image, and it will show an image. And you see here, it won't actually show the image because we don't have an image to show. Well, what's really important here, and you will find this actually in the HTML spec, it does not have an alt attribute. So it's alt, and I'm just going to call it image this time. We'll dive into that later. For every image element in your website, you can add the alt attribute. I'll even open it on MDN. MDN is like the base where you find most information. You can even find an example here, so I don't have to type myself. I'm going to share it in the chat as well. I think that's the best way to show it even. So you see here, there's an image. It has a CSS class, which isn't really relevant. You have a source, which actually points to where the image is on the website. And you have an alt text. And this alt text is actually an alternative text for the image. So let's say the image doesn't load. You will see the alt text instead. Let's say you use a piece of assistive technology like a screen reader. They cannot show the image, or the image has no value for you. It will show the alternative text. Let's say you're using Braille to read your website. Then the alternative text is of much more value than the images. You could say, hey, I'm not going to add it. But you're actually using invalid HTML then. If you look in the HTML spec, it is required to add an alt text. Everybody should add one. You are helping a lot of people. It's a really small thing to do. And if you don't do it, you exclude people. So I'm just going to show quickly how you do it on Twitter. You can tweet something, and I can add an image. I'm just going to see. Oh, I think I still have a date picker screenshot from I don't know where. So this is me composing a tweet on Twitter. It's really simple. And this is where I usually type my messages. I won't this time because I have nothing to say. That's clear from the stream. And then you have this. Now I have the large version. And you see here this field description. So I'm just going to go back here. You have first the image. It's really big, and it has it's an image also. I think there's a small image to the label. It's unclear what it is, but it also says add description. Description is a weird name for accessibility people. I won't dive into that, but this is what adds the alt text. So you can say here text field with an invalid date and a red error message, for example. This could be an image description. It's rather basic, but this way I could press save, and I go back to my tweet, and you see here the description. that you just added. This is how you add an alt text on Twitter. So what should all these people have done? You know, how could they have made it work? They could have simply said that it was a screenshot, and they could have added the text that they had in the image into the image description. If they had done that, they had already typed the text. There's not much to make up for them. They already had the text to put in here. And if they added it, it would be inclusive. It would be truly inclusive, not just for black people, like it was meant to be, but for people with different abilities as well. It's a really small gesture, and it's really easy to do. You can do it in a Twitter client on iOS and Android as well. I don't know. I don't know why people don't do it. It's like the basic spec, and they should always do it. So I'm just going to discard this, and I'm going to go to my own timeline just to see if I have a recent image. I try to always add image descriptions, so yeah, somebody says it's still not standard in Twitter options. I think you have to activate it first in the options. Yeah, that's true. That's a really good point. I already have to activate it, but you actually have to go to settings and privacy, and this should be standard. I don't know why it isn't even standard. And I think there's the accessibility part, and you can say compose image descriptions. And this is the first part that's really bad, because you have to activate it. And what's even worse, that I recently got a message asking me if I wanted to add image descriptions. So basically it was about to turn it off, and I had to acknowledge again that I really did want image descriptions. Otherwise it would turn it off completely. So this is how you can add it yourself. I think everybody should do this. I mean, it's so simple. I mean, sometimes it's a bit of a barrier for me to post a picture, but then afterwards I think, was it really that important? You know, if you have the time to type out a message, please type it out in the image as well. And then what happens if you scroll back to your through your own timeline, you see this image, and in the left bottom corner of the image there's like this small label tag that says alt, A-L-T, alt for alternative text, and that's the way it's called on most places. Not image description, but alt text, alternative text. And what then happens if I inspect this image in the browser, and I have to go move things aside again, because why should it remember? So here in my Firefox, you see there's an image. It has a class, again, just like on MDN. And it says alt is a curve cut that does not align with the path right behind it. And that's the image I had. And it also has a draggable attribute and a source attribute. But here it says exactly the alt text that I added. And that's it. It's basically a small description of what you see. That is what I wanted to tell with this image, and I'm going to look at what you can put in an alt attribute in a second. But this is what I wanted to tell. You see a curve cut, you see a path, they did not align. That's the joke for me. What's really interesting though, and I hope I can show that, yeah, I have this image below. Nothing against the tweet. Oh, you believe it's turned on by default now? Oh, that would be great. But that's really strange that I still got the question. So I got a remark in the chat that maybe it's turned on by default now. And then I get another message. It's true for the web app. iOS client no longer offers this option. Image descriptions cannot be turned off anymore. Okay, so Twitter accessibility is actually doing work. I'm really glad about this. This is like an entry point for a lot of people, and I'll tell you why. So that this is the default is good, but there are still points for improvement. I'm going to show that. Nothing against this tweet. I'm just going to use it as an example. What Twitter does by default, that's really strange. If when you have an image tag, it already adds an alt, and it says alt is image. And why is that strange? It does not describe the image. It adds no value. No value at all. It's actually more confusing. Because what happens, and I'm going to another resource here, I think it should be mentioned in MDN as well. Oh, here it also says the source attribute is required. Isn't that just great text? The source attribute is required, and the attribute, it doesn't even say that the attribute is required. That's funny, because it is. The interesting part though, and I'll tell you about that, that's what I want to say. the alt attribute of an image, it should contain either the description of the image, which is often the case, but on a lot of websites you can also add an empty alt attribute. So what Twitter should have done here is they should have emptied this attribute. Alt is. This is an empty alt attribute. You can even do it in the HTML5 Boolean way, just alt. So you type alt, and then it adds alt is. What it does now, that's a big and important distinction, is if you come across an image with your screen reader, it has several options. If an image has a description, like we just said, it reads out the image description. I can even let you hear it. I think I lowered the voice volume this time.
A curb pudding R2.
I'm gonna
Snowcap mountain.
Yeah. I'm gonna mouse over this image.
A curb cut that does not align with the path right behind it. https://twitter.com/ericcross/status/
Yeah, I don't need the rest, but the image.
Curb cut that does not align with the path right behind it. http.
That's exactly what I said as a description. And when you go through the page, I'm not sure if I'm gonna do that right.
Menu button, out of group, heading level 1 conversation. Out of grouping.
Yeah, I'm used to using Mac, so this is a bit different, but
a curb cut that does not align
it reads out the alt.
Right behind it.
And if we go back to this image, it just says
https
image. That's of no use. What happens when you have no alt at all? It might actually read the URL of the image and the file name of the image. It's completely unpredictable. You're using HTML that is basically invalid HTML. So if your browser doesn't know what it should be, then how should a screen reader even know? It's really strange to just add no alt at all. The screen reader often starts pronouncing the name of the image. If you use an empty alt, like I just showed, it will ignore the image. It will think the image is decorative. And when is an image decorative? That's when I take the Alt Decision 3. I'm going to turn off the screen reader again. This is a resource that I gladly link to. It was even mentioned before I started the stream, like, hey, please can you mention this? Well, I was already planning to. If you look at an image, there are situations where you have to add an alt and where you don't have to add an alt, and where you can think about what you put in the alt. And this is a great way to find out. It's a pretty small thing. And the first question they ask is, does the image contain text? Well, for a lot of these Black Lives Matter messages, it says yes. Yes, the image does contain text. And the text is also present as real text nearby. That's basically what they do here. You know, if this had said home and it says home right next to it, then it's a duplicate. It's like redundant information, but that's not the case. No, and the text is only shown for visual effects. Visual effects? No. That's, for example, well, I'll show the classic. I'm just going to type in matrix pattern on Google. You know, if you have a background like this, you have this black background with all these ones and zeros, or you have Japanese signs on it or whatever, it's meant to be decorative. Oh, I'm getting a question. Is it a failure of ATAG that this guidance isn't offered to people authoring content on Twitter? I'm not really familiar with ATAG. I usually look at WCAG. WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. So I look at content. ATAG is the authoring tool accessibility guideline. So it's when you make authoring tools. I can only say what I would do myself. If I would make a tool in which you can publish messages, and part of that message has required information, I would inform my users. Yes, that's what I could say. And in a way, they do try to do this, of course. And for example, what Facebook does is that they use artificial intelligence. They say, this image could contain a square, a circle, a person, which is completely useless information to most, because it doesn't do anything with the sentiments of the image. I used to study photography. We talked about connotations and annotations. There's a big difference when a picture is a black male or the picture is President Obama giving a speech on a certain date. And the Facebook AI cannot show the difference. So it will tag every image. It will show alt text for every image, and it rarely adds value. That's my experience and what I hear from a lot of people. But just yeah. So a good example of decorative text is the matrix pattern. You see it a lot. Maybe it would be a failure if they didn't offer the option. I don't know. I really don't know. I can't say much about ATAG. If you're ever on Twitter and you want to bother somebody, I'm just going to mention them. That's easy. Ede de Vries, he should be aware. I'm going to share his URL on the chat. He should be aware of ATAG. He's one of the people that I know that works with ATAG. If you have any specific questions, just go bother him. It stops him from writing blog posts, but he should be fine. So we go back to this. Does the image contain text? And the text has a specific function, for example, an icon. Well, with all the Black Lives Matters, that was not the case. But here's the interesting part. When it is an icon, because you have these icon fonts, or for example, you could add an arrow with HTML, or you could add a plus sign or whatever, use the alt attribute to communicate the function. See functional images. And this is some of the more interesting parts. So let's say we have this image that we had before, and the image has a function. Let's say it's an image of a cross, and the function is to close something. So you could say I have a button. Slash button. So you have a button with an image inside. I'm just going to save it. Yeah, sure. So we don't get these messages. So you have an image inside a button. And this is a practical example. I see this a lot, these kind of constructions. When somebody uses a screen reader to focus this button, it will read out the alt text of the image. The alt text of the image becomes the accessible name, that's what we call it, the accessible name of the button. So if the alt text of the image is closed, because for example the image is a cross, then the function of the image is to convey the message that this closes something. So you have to think very functional about images. When this image would not have an alt, it's not only an issue with the image, it's an issue with the button. You would have a button without a name. Somebody with a screen reader approaching this button would only know that it's a button, not what it does. And trust me, modern web apps have a lot of buttons. If you don't know what these buttons do, you're in for some trouble. So that's the case of this one. The text has a specific function, for example, is an icon. Then you have to look at what the function of the image is. And this, just really make the separation. Functional images, you see them a lot these days. You see so many icons. They all need a functional image description. It's not about what they show. It's about what they tell you. Because if it was about what they show, I would have said alt is X. You know, that's the literal content, X. But it doesn't say anything. It doesn't help you close something. I mean, even better would be, and that's when we get back to this one, the empty alt attribute. I didn't even explain what it does. If you have an empty alt attribute, that suggests that it's a decorative image. It means that the image in itself either has no real meaning, and as a person trained as a photographer, I have to say there are a lot of images that don't have much of meaning, but that's my personal opinion, and it's diving into the image. But it also says that the information could be redundant. So, for example, you have a icon with the text close under it, then the image only it's sort of redundant information. It's added to the text that you can already read, and the image is an extra, an eye catcher. It makes it easier to scan. Twitter does this a lot happily. So it does a home icon, but it also says home. It has this hashtag. I would not know what this hashtag is for, but they add a text to say, hey, this hashtag is for exploring. They have this bell with a number, and they say, hey, it's notifications. The interesting part here is that they have this little 2. So the image doesn't just show that it's about notifications, they also show this 2. So they tell you how many notifications they have. and they don't show that in the image description. So I'm just going to dive into the code. Yeah, it's an SVG. So the bell icon is an SVG. And they add a div with the ARIA label, which is also a way to add an accessible name. A div with the ARIA label, 2 unread items. And in the div, they put a 2. So that means if you navigate to this link, let's see what it reads out. Oh, I can even use the accessibility. This is really a good part of Firefox. Let me just try this out again. So there's this link here. So when you navigate this page, it says notifications. So it reads out what the subject is, but it also says 2 unread notifications. And this is really important. It's so easy to miss that whatever image you use, it could convey something. It should tell you something. This is a functional image. It tells you something. So the 2 should be communicated as well. So back to the alt tree. So yeah, as is pretty clear, there's so much to tell about alt. When to use it, when not to use it, what to put in it. But this should be a starting point for many people. And this is the case that we had for all the Black Lives Matter messages. Does the image contain text? Yes. And the text in the image is not present otherwise. So we had messages with text, and there was just text, nothing else. So the text was in the image, it was not copied into the tweet, there was no link to a website that also had the text. It was purely an image of text. And then they say, use the alt attribute to include the text of the image. See images of text. And I'll say, see images of text. And then you go to a separate page of the tutorial. It's really a good tutorial. And it tells you that you can use an image, but you have to add an alt. So if you want text in your image, you could use an image, but you have to add an alt. You can also do it with CSS. That means you can make this text in CSS. That's really nice because you can also select it and copy and paste it. And when you use, for example, Google Translate, this will translate as well. This one again, an image, mathematical expression. You can also use images or with an alt. Or MathML, which is also supported. So it shows you what you can do if you have an image of text. So what are other cases? Well, is the image used in a link or a button? We just talked about this one. The image is used in a link or a button. And would it be hard or impossible to understand what the link or button does if the image wasn't there? So yeah, if we have a button and there is just an X in there and the X was not there, would it be hard or impossible to understand? Yes. Then we're talking about functional images. If there's also a text, then you say, no, continue. The other important question, does the image contribute meaning to the current page or context? For example, it's a simple graphic or photograph, then it's informative. So I'm really bad at informative images. What's a good example of informative image? Well, basically what I shared before, I guess. So this is an informative image. It delivers information on itself. It has its own function, like, hey, this is an image, this is what it displays, and the thing it displays is also what it should tell. So it's a path that doesn't align with the curb cut. That's exactly what I wanted the image to say. So it's a description of the image. It's an informative image. If it's a graph or a piece of information, then you go to the section for complex images. For example, for a graph, it's very graphical. Often you want to add a table. And if the image contributes meaning or context and it shows content that is redundant or real text nearby, then you again use the empty alt attribute. That's what we said before. So when we look at Twitter, you see these images, but there's real text nearby. So there's a profile image, but it also has a profile text. Then the image is redundant. So you mark it up as a decorative image, and your screen reader or assistive technology will hide the image. It will not show it. And that way it will only read profile, because that's the relevant part. You don't need to hear it twice. I mean, I don't read it twice as a person that can read. So if a screen reader sees this, then why would we hear it twice? Like, that's redundant information. We don't need that. And here again, is the image purely decorative or not intended for the user? This is the easiest. Like, if you have an image that is a background and it's purely decorative, or like a border or something, that's the best use case. That's so clear and empty. Then you use an empty alt, the screen reader will ignore it, and you're done with it. So that's just a quick walkthrough through this alt decision tree. I'm just going to share the URL. Just look at it case by case. I'm now going to tell you why alts are so very important, but also why lots of people trip over these. Well, first of all, when you go to the to WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, you have all these criteria. And the first one, 1.1.1, I mean, it could not be more first. There's 3 ones in there. It says non-text content. All non-text content that is presented to the user has a text alternative that serves the equivalent purpose, and I'll make this slightly larger, that serves the equivalent purpose except for the situations listed below. So it basically says all next non-text content, so that's images. You always trip over this with images. Has a text alternative. And then again, having the text right next to it is an alternative. WCAG isn't that tough. There are many things that are easy to understand. If there's text next to it, that plays the same role. So, except for the situations listed below, so controls or input, so this is for a button. If non-text content is a control or accepts user input, then it has a name that describes its purpose. So this is about function again. Refer to success criterion 4.1.2 for additional requirements for controls and content accept you. Okay, so we go to another point, and this is what I wanted to point to anyway. There's another rule in WCAG, very relevant, especially for the buttons. It says name role value. So for all user interface components, so that's things like form elements, links, components generated by scripts. Well, that's a broad description. It's for things like form elements, links, buttons. They need to have a name, an accessible name, a role, and a value. And when we talk about images, the alt text is the name. And if you have a button with an image inside, the alt text of the image will be the name of the button. And you always need one. Otherwise, you don't know what this button does or what it represents. There's also an exception for time-based media, which is really specific. Most videos or most websites don't feature video, thankfully. If it's a test or an exercise, yeah, sensory. There's even an exception for CAPTCHAs, which I don't really understand because CAPTCHAs are the worst. We talked about that last time. And for decoration, formatting, or when they are invisible. Yeah, when they are invisible, that's really easy. We already talked about decoration, and for formatting is also like they play a visual role, but it does not need to be communicated in text. So it's the first thing you find in WCAG, non-text content. This says images need alt text. There are exceptions, but in most cases this really applies. And a lot of people start inspecting a page by first going to 1.1.1. So this is the starting point for a lot of people. And another reason why this is also a really good criteria is because if I look at Twitter, for example, and I'm going to open my DevTools again, you see that I have this tab called Axe. Axe is an automated tool. And the fun thing is, it's really easy to find out if an image has or does not have an alt text. The extension is actually slowing down Firefox. I think it's taking pretty long. Twitter is a complicated website, but I'm not going to talk about diffs, so that's easy. It's really easy for an automated tool to find out if an image has an alt text or not. That's like the easiest things it can do. It can select all images. It says, does it have an alt? Yes or no? And it can mark it up as a failure. So a lot of people that start out with accessibility, they use these automated tools, and they're a great starting point. And they can tell you this image does not comply to WCAG. It's really easy. And what is also very interesting, I'm gonna type in here, not typos, WebAIM. So there's a website called WebAIM. They also have a tool that does automated testing, and they have a project called the WebAIM Million. And the way they say it themselves is an annual accessibility analysis of the top 1 million homepages. So they use their tool on 1 million homepages. It's an automated tool, so it doesn't even see everything. But one thing it does say is something about alt text, and it's really interesting. I'm going to share it in the chat again. It's a valuable link. It says there were 38, I'm not going to even mention the whole number, 38 million images in the sample. So they checked a million web pages, and they found 38.4 million images. And that translates to 38.4 images per homepage on average, because they checked homepages. And the number of images increased with 4.7% since 2019. That's not really the interesting part, but for something that's part of the HTML spec, something that everybody can do, something that often you already have the text for, or somebody that's writing text for you anyway, it says 31.3% of all homepage images, so that's 12 per page on average, had missing alternative text. So they had no alt attribute at all. That's not an empty alt like we discussed, but it's just missing. And over half of the images missing alternative text were linked images. So that's pretty serious, because if somebody removes the alt text from an image, I don't think they're gonna have a text alternative for that link. They are probably links that are empty. And you see this quite often actually. When you have a website with a social section, I'm just gonna show my own. I think I have these icons as well somewhere. Oh, I have text, okay. A lot of websites have what we call a doormat. So they have this section at the bottom of the page and they say, follow us, follow me. These are our socials, and you see an icon of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and whatever. And often it's just an icon. And the icon does not have alt text. And there's no added text anywhere near it. And when you don't add alt text, those links are empty. To a lot of people, they don't know where they go to. They don't know what they represent. You're having these people struggle on your website. They don't know what they're doing. And that's basically what they were saying here. So they were linked images. Then there were 9.3% of the images were assigned alternative text, had questionable or repetitive alternative text. So some of them did have text, but then the alt was image, like we just saw with Twitter. It has no value, it just said image. It could also say graphic or blank, or it would add a file name. A lot of content management systems do this. So if we talk about ATAG, a lot of content management systems, so the systems behind web pages, they allow you to add an image, but by default they will put the image file name as an alt tag, which is completely useless. So yeah, you can go through these numbers. There are a lot of more issues, but this is really big. A lot of websites fail to follow basic accessibility requirements, and it's so easily tested. You can run this tool on your own website. You can use WebAIM. You can use Axe that I just showed you. You're basically just failing at HTML. And that's sad. That's really sad. So I'm just going to close these again. And then I'm going to add one more link. I think I already shared the... No, I'm just going to add this one again. This is where I saw the criteria. This is the WCAG 2.1 quick ref. You can find all criteria here. There are quite a few, but this one is, well, a great starting point. If you want to improve your website today, if there's one thing you want to do, you could do this. Go through your website and check all images. And it's also about, it's about any type of image. For example, here they use an arrow. It's an SVG, and there's a text next to it. But this arrow also says something, And little icons. I'm just gonna expect SVGs everywhere now here, so that's good. They're well supported these days. So this is an SVG with text. This image says clear filters. And I'm just gonna check Twitter again. Do we see some images here that are... See here, they all have text. They have tweet. See if I can get some examples. I'm not out here to shame people or anything. That's not the goal. This is also, for example here, they have a button with an X on it. And that's not the native button. That looks differently. This is an SVG. And well, I'm just going to ask it. So we have a button with an X on it. I think we mentioned this case. What do you think the alt text should be? Can I get some feedback in the chat? That would be really nice. What should be the alt text of a button with an X in this case? We had one before. I mentioned one where it should be close. But do we know what this button does? Clear search bar, yeah. So clear search bar. It should also say actually what it clears. Does it? Yeah, but did you see it also closes the drop down, which is kind of, so it does two things, but it says neither of them. And if we get really technical, we talked about name role value. This one is a div with a role button, and it has no name. I can use the accessibility tool again. I'm gonna go to this one. Oh, and you see, I was hovering it. I'm just gonna use the tool again. When I hover it, it already gives me like this red sign and a line. It says interactive elements must be focusable. So there's already an issue with this button that you can't focus it, but it also says interactive elements must be labeled. And that's exactly what we're talking about. This is a button, but it's not labeled. There's an image in there, but it has no name. So this is an accessibility issue for Twitter. And somebody else says the cock to the right. I don't know if we can still... Oh yeah, here, this is pretty much the same thing. I can just scroll back. Where did it go? Did it just hide? No, it's still there. This is pretty much the same thing. You have this button with a cog, and the cog wheel should say something like settings for trends or something. I don't even know what it opens. Settings for trends. Oh, it's even a pop-up. Yeah, so it's your settings for trends. That's what it opens. But you don't know. It's just an image. So that's what alt tag does or should do. That's what we're missing. And I think I hear my child crying in the background, so that's a really good reason for me to wrap it up. I thank you all very much. But before we wrap it up, I want to ask, are there any questions about alt text? Are there any things that I can explain even more? I mean, there's a lot. I think you should really check out these sources. The alt decision tree is a really good starting point for both decorative and functional and informational images. Those are like the three main cases. Informative, they call them. Those are the main three cases. That's what I see the most. Decorative image, you use an empty alt. Functional image, you talk about what the alt is actually for, what the image is actually for. So it could be something like close or clear. And then the informative image, you just is such an easy word. You just describe what the image does, what it actually conveys. And it's always about what you want to communicate with an image. Even when you write an informative image text, it's always about what you want to communicate. I mean, I can take pictures of Barack Obama. I just go to Google image search, type Barack Obama. At all these pictures, I could describe them as a black man posing, black man talking, black man behind a microphone. That's an informative way to describe it. You know, that's how an AI would look at it probably. But that's not what you're trying to tell. If you are adding an image of Barack Obama, you're probably trying to refer to his speech. You're referring to something he said. You're referring to a certain situation, a moment in time. When you describe the alt text of an image, always think about what is this image for? What am I trying to tell with this image? Because what you're telling with the image is exactly what you should say with the alt text as well. So I think that's it for now. If there are no further questions, you can always reach me on Twitter for more questions. And I hope next time we have Eric Bailey like I planned. I hope he has the time then. I'm just going to show the article once more. And it should show on this one. I don't want to switch to the tab. I just want to show the article. Yeah. So he has this article up on Smashing Magazine. Feel free. And I see somebody saying, yeah, alt is even available for your pics on Instagram. Exactly. Even Instagram, also a Facebook platform. It offers you the option to share your alt. Slack, it's also good practice to add image text. If you use animated images on Twitter, can I show that for the web client as well? There are so many places where you can add it, and it's such easy thing to do. So I'm just gonna click some random images. Sorry, something is gonna autoplay probably. So half naked man, I see also a label add description. So also when you add an animated image, it doesn't matter what kind, you can add a description. And this is also one that you can really think about. Yeah, why am I adding this image? What is my goal with this? What am I trying to tell? Especially with moving images, because they are so easily missed and misunderstood. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you all. Looking forward to the next time to have another guest. And till then.